a geek. Talking baseball every week. 'Cause they're Gleeman and the Geek.
And welcome to Gleeman and the Geek, Carlos Correa Reports Edition. I am John Bonus, TwinsDaily.com. With me, Aaron Gleeman with TheAthletic.com.
Nick Nelson pointed out that on the most recent Patreon podcast, you cart ahead of the horse to yourself and called yourself John Daly from Twins Bonus, basically.
I did not.
You almost did. You almost
Really?
called yourself John Daly, which a couple people sent me pictures of John Daly, the golfer, which honestly, John's not quite as colorful.
A couple people being like, all my partners are Twins Daily, right?
Yeah, well, those
did you have a little
schmucks.
Google chat with? Right?
Yeah. But yeah, it's a similar look. Somebody, Sweet Lou
It is
Hennessy.
becoming a similar look, by the way.
Yeah, well, that's what happens to you guys. You party boys as you near your 50s.
That's right.
That's what happens to you guys. But Sweet
Lou
Lou Hennessy.
I guess they're taking up some lung darts, I think.
Yeah, great. Our friend from Zone Coverage, who is of course best known to friends and family for bringing me Sweet Martha's cookies in the press box last year, sent a great little meme of Tiger Woods sort of looking at a crazily dressed John Daly on the putting green with like his hands on his hips, and he said he marked it Aaron and John, which I like because that implies I'm Tiger Woods.
You're the Tiger Woods?
But it was more like, well, this guy's sick of this guy's antics, but this guy just wants to drink a beer and party. So that's about what we got on the show today. Yeah, John is in the press box at Hammond Stadium in Fort Myers. Like you mentioned, Carlos Correa showed up today.
Yep.
He's
and as a result, of course, there was a lot of extra press at the clubhouse today.
Right.
I mean,
technically, they still have position players.
Couple days,
3
till
days.
Sunday. Sunday's position players report. So.
Right. I come in when I'm a position player. I'm a DH, designated hitter. I'm a platoon DH.
I should have just mentioned, like almost all the position players are here right now.
Yeah.
I'd say there's a handful that are not. I don't think I've seen Buxton. I don't think I've seen Gallo. I didn't actually pay that much attention as I went to the clubhouse today to see if, which lockers still haven't, been lived in yet. But pretty much, I mean, Correa was one of the only handful that had not reported as of yet. So, yeah.
Is he in the far right back corner? Or the right by the door?
Right by the door.
Oh, he got the Nelson Cruz spot.
Yeah, that's right. He gets the one right by the door that you enter in, right?
Yeah, on the left.
Yes, on the left.
Yeah, that's the Nelson Cruz memorial spot. I always thought that was interesting as a spot because it seems to be an annoying place. Unless, now I say that as someone who doesn't like to interact with anyone ever. However, if you're Nelson Cruz or Carlos Correa and you, let's say, have a normal functioning brain and you enjoy people and you view yourself a leader in the clubhouse, perhaps the idea that literally everyone has to walk in front of you to and from makes it good. I would want the old Josh Donaldson spot, which is just the furthest back corner that no one could ever accidentally walk past.
You're talking about the furthest back corner to the right or to the left?
The right. Well, Donaldson was on the right, but
yeah, to the right, that's a pitcher land. So I think Sonny Gray is over there at this time, and to the left, the back corner is Vasquez. That's usually that's usually the catcher's corner over there.
Well, the catchers also get a consideration. Like for instance, Sandy Leon at the end of last season got what had been the Joe Smith spot on the left, right when you walk in the clubhouse. In part because he's a veteran, but in part because catchers just need a lot of room to put their crap.
Right. Well, I mean, we should mention almost all of those spots have an empty locker next to them.
You get it's like a double locker.
Right. And the reason why is because, they do interviews over there and the poor sap that has to be right next to them can't get to their locker more often than not. So they just leave it open for them. So
this was my first week ever covering the Twins, 4 years ago or 3 years ago. I was interviewing Taylor Rogers, and he was in reliever land, which is, it was Tyler Duffy and Taylor Rogers and Trevor May at the time and Tyler Clippard, I think. And I talked to Taylor Rogers twice in 3 days. And then at the end of the second one, he was very friendly. He's a good interview. I think he turned to either Tyler Clippard or Trevor May and was like, you got anything for them? because it's like, yeah, they've just been standing next to
Right.
me. If you have a normal
Exactly.
locker, I mean, they're
Right.
decent sized lockers, but it's like, yeah, you're a foot from me listening, and you're just like tying your shoes or doing a crossword puzzle while an interview goes on. So yeah, that's actually
there is an interesting dynamic down here.
I was just about to say,
we should interviews is that there are people that, you as a, reporter, you have to interview them. And especially like this week, you want to get a good 15 minutes to 20 minutes to half an hour with some of the bigger names. And that's with everybody there getting stuff. And you cover an enormous amount of stuff. And then you all go back and you transcribe it and you save it, because that is something that you're going to, you might do a report on that or a story on that player, but you also might just hang on to that and have, 10 different things that you can reference later on in the year. Right. In the meantime, there's also like, a bunch of guys who are here for their first time or are, like Blaine Enlow. I interviewed Blaine Enlow yesterday. Blaine Enlow is sitting in his locker, standing in his locker. Blaine Enlow, there are people who are like, I will give one long interview in that week because I don't want to have to be talking to everybody all the time, right? Like, like somebody like Buxton, somebody you kind of got to protect, because otherwise people will constantly be giving him an interview. Well, Blaine Enlow is more than happy to talk to anybody that will talk to Blaine Enlow. He just got taken off the 40-man roster. He had a crummy year last year, coming back from Tommy John surgery. Like, and so, and then there's, because there are so many guys in camp, 69 guys in camp, right?
67.
67. That's how many.
I wish there were 69. That would have been such a better headline. 69 thoughts on 69 players in camp. Let's hope they had 2 guys.
Exactly right. And then, a lot of them are like, I don't recognize that name. And that's because he was a minor league free agent signee with a non-roster invitation. And you got to go look him up again. Like, that last name doesn't ring a bell.
You could just read my article.
I will.
67 thoughts on 67. I have a list. I have a little Google document for next Monday when I'm there. I'm showing up Sunday, but I'll be at the ballpark Monday, and I have a list of like people to interview right away. And the list is exactly as you described. I don't think there's a single guy who has more than like 8 games in the majors on the list, because to your point, like I want to interview, I don't know, Austin Martin, let's say. Right. And Austin Martin is not going to be there for all of camp. I'm sorry to break the news to Austin Martin, but he's there while there's 67 guys. Right. He might not be there when there's 47 guys. Right. And so you start to, for a couple of weeks, it's just everyone is just jammed into this clubhouse basically, but you start to go up, first day of cuts, there go 8 guys, second day of cuts, there go 6 more guys, and then you start to look around and there's a lot fewer guys like Blaine Enlow who are just happy to chat or just don't get talked to that much. So I'm going to try to come in and hit and make the rounds and hit all the guys who I don't want to say are happy to see me specifically because they don't know who the hell I am, but are happy to see someone who's interested from whether they're prospects
who have a story to tell, right?
Like you said, like this guy's kind of interesting, but what's your deal? That's my leadoff question to everyone this year. I decided, hey buddy, what's your deal? And I'm just curious, do people get angry?
They look at you blankly.
Yeah. Do they go F off or do they
say, what's your deal?
Well, that's all you don't want to know, buddy. You don't want to know. Yeah. Anyway, so John's there. I'm getting punchy because I'm going to be there in 72 hours or something like that. Not even
48 hours.
Yeah. So our next show hopefully will be in person Monday after, like John said.
But that show will be a Patreon.
That's true. It'll be a Patreon, and our last show is a Patreon. Yeah. I mean, if you've been holding off to sign up to become a Patreon subscriber, supporter, now's the time to do it.
Oh my God.
The next Patreon show will be live from the ballpark with both of us. It'll be the full squad day, the first day, which means everyone who's supposed to be there is there. They're all going to be on the field. I think we should maybe plan on recording it during BP or something like that, so we can hold the mic out the window and hear a few crack of the bats or something.
I like that idea.
And yeah, from this point forward, we're going to be doing. We continue to do the weekly free show, which you're listening to right now, and we're glad to have you on it. But we're going to be doing, I would say, at minimum 1, most likely an average of 2 per week, also on the Patreon from now through opening day. And then, of course, once the season starts, it's going to be business as usual on that front too. So
probably have some beat writers as guests. We'll definitely be having some mailbags.
Don't discourage them from joining with these beat writers. But yeah, we're going to have Megan Ryan on. I had just said to Megan Ryan like 2 weeks ago, I wonder if this is why she left.
Well, maybe. Yeah.
I just said to her, "Hey, you're the last of the beat writers that we haven't had on. You're going to have to do the podcast." And she was like shockingly into it. And then like 4 days later, she's like, "Hey guys, I'm leaving the beat." And I was like,
it might be
"Ooh."
more interesting to have her on now because now she can just dish
Yeah.
dirt on everything. Like
I may-
get the bitter Megan.
Right. We may want to give her a few weeks to cool down. Yeah, I don't know. I'll say this about Megan: she will be a good guest, maybe a little too good by some people's standard. Yeah,
well, we should be clear. She moved over to the
yes.
She moved over
She
to
didn't
the
like get
business
cut
side
or
of
anything.
Star
I was
Tribune.
just kidding on that.
She moved over to the Star Tribune business side. She's going to be an editor over there.
She's an editor now, which
yeah.
boy, not even writing it. Can you imagine that? Not even writing anymore.
My God,
what we all aspire to do. Okay, so join the Patreon. It's Patreon, patreon.com/Gleeman. And the way it works is those are commercial free episodes. Occasionally we even drop a curse word in. It's sort of like it's more of like a private club vibe because it's just a smaller audience. I was going to say a much smaller audience, but it's not that much smaller anymore. Thankfully, we're grateful for that.
Yeah.
And so they're like midweek episodes. Like John said, we do mailbags, we do interviews. We kind of get into more of the nitty gritty of topics. Spend a half hour on something instead of 2 minutes on something.
Right.
And then also if just anything happens during the week, it's nice to not wait 4 more days or 5 more days to do the free show. So yeah, there's my pitch to join the Patreon, patreon.com/Gleeman. Okay. So, there isn't really news. Like you said, pretty much everybody's there. We talked on the Patreon about like some basic day one injury updates on everybody. But for the most part, like if you're interested, we're going to hit on some of that. But for the most part, everyone is healthy-ish at worst. That was expected to be healthy. Like Chris Paddock,
just kind of run over a high level sort of what
it'll take forever. There's 15.
No, it'll be real quick.
Royce Lewis and Chris Paddock are out until midseason minimally.
Right.
Everyone else is either fully healthy, like Kenta Maeda, let's say,
or
healthy but gonna ramp up slowly. I would say.
And
is there anybody who?
And those guys are Alcala, Kirilloff, potentially Polanco and Buxton. I haven't heard much about that, but I mean, no limitations on Larnick, Maeda, Ober, Mahle, all those guys. So,
right.
Yeah.
Did you, when you chatted with Tyler Mahle yesterday?
Yes.
Did you mention to him that your podcast partner has been accused of not believing he has a right shoulder?
I did. Okay. What happened? Where is your right shoulder? What has it disappeared? Right.
Just a big empty space.
I had it was a good conversation with Mahle, and I was trying to kind of get him to open up a little bit more or explain a little more. He was really talkative, really chatty, as players are. And I don't think we had really seen that last year when we were trying to get information about. So tell us about the shoulder here.
Right.
It was all very vague, and it's still very vague, but I get the feeling, and this is not going to soothe your thoughts at all. I think it's very vague because he doesn't really know exactly what's going on.
Right.
Or didn't know exactly what was going on. His theory is, first of all, I should mention, he did have something like this. He felt he had the same issue back in 2018.
Okay.
Now, 2018, he was a rookie, and he did not tell anybody about it. And he just kind of kept pitching, and he started out pretty good, and then he kind of sucked, and eventually got sent down to the minors. And it's not clear that he told any, and he had a sore shoulder for a little bit. Maybe missed a couple of games and then eventually pitched his way back to AAA and was kind of viewed as, we got a potentially failed prospect here. And it was a potentially failed prospect because his slider and his changeup were stinking. They just got the snot kicked out of him in 2018, so much so that in 2019 he ditched the slider completely. He switched to an entirely different pitch for 2019. He was not good in 2019 either, but he didn't have that problem. He didn't have that shoulder problem. 2020, he didn't have the shoulder problem, and he brought back the slider, and that's when he had the breakout year. Right. That was the year that he had the breakout year.
And then he was good in 2021 also.
He was good in 2021, no problem, no things. And he attributes last year to two things, he's speculating on what happened, why he had shoulder fatigue last year when he hadn't had it for 4 years, right? And he, by the way, he's also, this is interesting too, I thought, because similar to Correa, Correa has this MRI on his ankle. Everybody's like, boy, is your ankle screwed up? He's like, yeah, it feels fine. Or not feels fine, but it doesn't really seem to be hurting me at all.
Not been an issue.
It was exactly the opposite with Mahle, right? He gets MRI after MRI after MRI on his shoulder last year. They're like, we don't see a thing. He's like, well, kind of weak.
Right.
It's not really working.
Right.
I don't know exactly what it is. It turns out the MRI and the physical experience are not necessarily the same thing, So he attributes last year to two things. First of all, the lockout, where he could not prepare with the team and such the same way he could prepare otherwise,
right?
Because he was locked out, right? And then also the lockout as well, because that meant he had to ramp up real quick.
Yeah, spring training.
So he came into it with less preparation, and then had to ramp up even quicker. And as a result, he thinks he just put a little too much strain on the shoulder, and it never really kind of got it back until he got more rest. We also talked to him about he had gone, and by the way, his problem last year was versus right-handers. As a right-handed pitcher, his problem was versus right-handers. He held left-handers to a 602 OPS,
wow.
And right-handers to a 783.
Was that he several times came out to the mound and threw 86 miles an hour. Really
that's
that's the crazy thing. His problem, I get what you're saying. Like his splits got a little wonky, but his problem really was not at any point super performance based. Like he wasn't great.
Well, listen, when he was 86 miles per hour, he was just not pitching, right? He was just being pulled out of
But
the
I'm
game,
saying
right?
if he just pitched like he had for the Reds down the stretch with the Twins and hadn't missed time, we wouldn't be talking about him as like a big question mark, is all I'm saying.
Right.
It's the,
Well, but if you take a look at his splits, like I said, he had trouble versus right-handers, and he talked a little bit about that. He's like, yeah, my slider was crap all year. My slider and my changeup, especially my sliders, was crap all year, which was also the problem in 2018 when he had that issue, right? And so I said, well, is that related to the shoulder? He's like, no, I think I just couldn't get a feel for it, and blah, 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 blah. And so in the off season, he was talking about going to Driveline, and we assumed that it was because of his shoulder. And he went early. He went like in October to Driveline.
We should say is like a independent private facility where it's like just the best tech and the best independent coaches.
Right.
And a lot of coaches have been hired from Driveline to major league teams. And in fact, some major league teams like have a relationship now with Driveline where they specifically like send their players there. Well, I mean, the guy who runs Driveline, Kyle Body, was the pitching coordinator for the Reds for like 3 years or whatever. But yeah, it's like the workshop for pitching and hitting for that matter. But like guys just go there and just get like a kind of a full like they give you like they run you through like a physical, but like for your pitching.
Right.
Like they basically say like you can do more spin here. We're going to clean up your mechanics here. Your release points is screwed up here.
It's like having an independent pitching coach.
Yes,
you know what I mean.
So teams have really embraced that. But yeah, I mean that's good news in and of itself. Just that, like you said, early in the offseason or whatever.
He had never gone there before, and he kind of got recommended, so we wanted to go check it out. And we were like, okay, so what was their assessment? Thinking that they were talking about the shoulder,
right?
And the answer was, well, I didn't go there to talk about the shoulder. I went there because my slider sucked. And I wanted to work on my slider, and he did. He's apparently like they basically said, change your grip a little bit here and quit trying to throw the snot out of the ball when you throw it. And sure enough, it immediately fixed itself, and he went home and he continued to work on that. He feels really good about his slider this year, right? Which we'll see if and he himself said, yeah, it's definitely breaking a lot more. It's where I wanted it to be. We'll see how the hitters react. I'm looking forward to seeing it in a game and see, whether or not, what I think is going to be effective is truly going to be effective. But basically he just, kind of went back to the same strengthening routines and such that he had for his shoulder for, most of last year. He's been working them in the off season. He's been working them up now. He says he feels great. There's no limitations. I mean, I didn't find anything I was trying to find something that would ease your mind, Aaron Gleeman, about his shoulder. I did not find anything that would ease your mind about his shoulder, other than he just thinks he rushed it last year and it never really got time.
Well, okay, that's plot. Here's the thing.
Jared?
I say this to myself a lot when I have anxiety about things, which I don't have so much anymore, but I used to have a lot of, which is you can work yourself up over how something will go. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
If I knew I had to make a speech somewhere or I had to be a guest on some show or I had to go to some wedding that I wasn't looking forward to go, whatever it is. I used to spend weeks going, well, I'm going to get out of the car and then I'm going to go here and I'm going to do this. And,
Right.
we've talked about this. At some point I realized it's going to happen one way or the other, right? Like I'm going to do it. It's going to happen. And we're going to find out what the answer to how is this going to go. We're going to find out.
Right.
And so we can spend weeks or months, as we have now during this offseason, speculating about what it means that Tyler Mahle did this and did that and didn't do this and his shoulder, and does it satiate my curiosity about it or whatever. Here's the thing. Within the next few days, if not today or tomorrow, he's going to throw.
Right.
And we're going to know, is he throwing 90? Which would be, normal-ish at this time of spring training, or is he throwing 82? And it's, I think, worthwhile to discuss it and speculate about it and go through the scenarios and all that. We've now reached the point, thankfully, in the offseason. It isn't even in the offseason. Now we've reached the point of spring training where, well, we're going to find out, right? I mean, we used to go through this with Francisco Liriano every year, which Liriano would inevitably be coming back from some injury, whether it was a surgery or just got shut down early or was just having some soreness or whatever. And we'd be speculating, what's his velocity like and will he be ready? And then there'd be a report that, he was in the winter ball playing in, whatever, Dominican or whatever. And he was throwing 99 miles an hour. And I just remember we probably talked about it on the show at the time. That's great. I'd rather hear he was throwing 99 than 89, but he's going to show up to spring training and we're going to see what he's actually throwing.
Well, one of the reasons we were arguing or debating or speculating about where Mahle really was at the beginning of the offseason is there was still time to make a move. There was still time to go and get another pitcher to try and reinforce the rotation, right? To take a look at everything and say, you know what? They could use another arm. Turns out they went and got the other arm. They went and got Pablo Lopez. Now it cost them Luis Ariz. They didn't do a free agency signing, but they did it. Now we're at the point now where, like you said, it's not like they can make a quick move to replace him. Now it's, either he's going to be healthy or he's not going to be healthy, and we're just going to sit and see what happens. So,
we're gonna do a little on-air production meeting where I'm going to tell John to shut his video off because it is lagging behind and is affecting the audio.
All right, no problem.
On my end, at least. Nothing. John, looking at John is scary enough. Looking at John where he's sort of pixelated and jumping around on screen is it's like Max Headroom. Really, there's a reference for the kids to get. There's a 1985. I think I'm too young to know that.
I love the Max Headroom reference.
That's you, John, to a T. So Tyler Mahle, so far so good, but we're gonna find out. I think the only other thing we have a little something planned here that we have a little structure to the show finally. But before we get to that, I just wanted to point out that a topic that we've talked about quite a bit, which is what's left of the free agent reliever bin. What are kind of the last second options? And we've talked a lot about Michael Fulmer just because he ended last season with the Twins and had been available. We talked about Andrew Chafin. I think we talked a little bit about Matt Moore too as another lefty. All three of those guys have now signed in the last, 5 days. Fulmer got a 1-year, $3 million deal from the Cubs. Chafin signed with the Diamondbacks, and then Matt Moore yesterday, I think, signed a 1-year, I want to say $7.5 million deal with the Angels. And so there isn't much left on the free agent reliever thing, although one of the things we talked about on the Patreon podcast 2 days ago is your conversation you had or the scrum that Falvey did on day one of camp, literal day one, where he basically downplayed the possibility that they were going to sign a reliever or anyone really to a guaranteed, major league contract.
Right.
But as we discussed at the time, at this point, most of the relievers are probably looking at non-roster invites anyway, maybe a 1-year, $2 million deal or something like that. But it's if it's not the bottom of the barrel, it's within sight, basically.
Yeah, that's right. And he basically he was specifically talking about NRIs, which is non-roster invites, right? So if you're looking at adding somebody, it's not somebody that you're going to be adding to the 40-man roster. It's somebody that you're going to be or guaranteeing a contract with. It might be a 2-way contract or something like that. There's still some names out there that are intriguing, Brad Hand being one of them, right?
Right.
It's just a question is, are we at the point where Brad Hand has to be looking at a non-guaranteed contract? I think we maybe are. Although, it might very well be that we are at the point, this is probably one of the toughest times to get a contract. If you're a player still out there looking for a job, it might be easier to find one in like 3 weeks.
I was just about to say it, yeah.
Right. When people start warming up and suddenly, this guy doesn't have the velocity we thought he had or he ended with last year. And boy, maybe we could use a left-handed person like a Brad Hand somewhere on the bullpen, like it feels, or somebody just plain gets injured. Jobs I think they're more likely to have some jobs open up second week of March, than there are right now. And we'll see if the WBC plays with that at all.
Yeah, I mean, you're rarely going to see, and we joked about this on the Patreon, I think, but like you're rarely going to see, week 1 of camp, everybody's just kind of reporting, and the GM looks around and goes, "Ooh, we stink. We need help." It's like if you thought that a week ago, you could have done something about it. So yeah, to your point, the herd will be thinned out a little bit by injuries or poor performance or guys who actually suck. You're actually watching them.
I'll just add this. There's just always so much optimism the first few days. Like,
right.
You are talking about, 100 people between 150 people between players and coaches and support staff and reporters and, fans wandering around the ballpark. They're all here because they loved baseball. They chose the career path because they really loved baseball for the most part. 98% of them really love baseball. And so, the first couple of days where you're feeling like, hey, we get to start playing baseball again. Like there's just a tangible high going around in the ballpark for the first week or so. And that optimism lends itself towards, hey, I bet you so-and-so could be really good this year,
right.
And then, once that high, that initial dopamine dose goes away, a week and a half in, 2 weeks in, you start seeing some games and so-and-so's got to back off. He's going to miss his next start, something like that. The reality does set in a little bit second or third week of spring training. So.
Luckily, right around the time that tangible high starts to decrease, I'm going to show up, and I always bring a tangible high everywhere I go.
That's right.
Literal, figurative. Okay, so the thing we wanted to talk about today as sort of the overall structure of the show is, I don't know if we want to phrase it as like questions that need to be answered this spring, or just sort of storylines we want to see more about, storylines that we are curious about. What are like the big talking points when you show up to the ballpark every day to cover this team? What are the things that are on, the front of your mind that you're like, ooh, let's see this guy take BP, or let's see this guy throw. And there are a bunch of them because that's the nature of any team, but especially a team where there were, a billion health question marks all off season. And like you said, still some right now. So we kind of wanted, we each assigned ourselves to come up with 5 of them, 5, I don't know, questions to answer this spring, let's call it. But what I'm curious to see is, I came up with 5 and you came up with 5. It's possible they are literally the same 5. My guess is there's probably a few overlaps minimum. So I'm curious to see like how identical is our mindset on this thing. So we're going to kind of go through those and then have a discussion and give any updates on all that stuff. But before we do that, should we hit we only have one sponsor today. So should we hit our one sponsor?
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Which is BetterHelp. We are doing essentially what you can do on BetterHelp, which is you can hop on a video call and get real therapy from a real therapist and get actual help from somebody in the privacy of your own home at the convenience of your schedule for as long or as short as you want. And I always say this, if you're someone who doesn't even like being on video, you can do a phone chat with audio only chat. And if you're a weirdo like me who hates being on the phone, you can just type with somebody who will answer your questions and talk to you about whatever you want to talk about. And so I think that, to me, that's like the biggest appeal of BetterHelp, which is however in your mind you think would be the best path towards getting some help with whatever problem you have from a real therapist. They can set it up for you.
Yeah, and not to mention, that also reduces the costs overall. And so, all the obstacles that get in the way from you making the sometimes real difficult decision to go seek therapy, the last thing you want when you've gone through that is then take a look at the obstacles that are involved, whether it's finding a person to talk to or finding a time to find that person or finding a time on their schedule to talk to them or having to pay for that sort of thing. All of that stuff is eased up with BetterHelp. So you can discover your potential with BetterHelp and visit betterhelp.com/Gleeman today, and you're going to get 10% off your first month if you go to betterhelp.com/Gleeman. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Gleeman. Get 10% off your first month.
Okay. I don't know. I guess I can start.
Yeah, you start.
I kind of put these in order, but I don't know. I didn't want to be that precise with it. So I guess I'll start, which
I don't have any specific order on these things. I don't have a top 5, but you go ahead.
My first one, see, the thing, like I mentioned this, but like there are so many injuries, and that is such a dominant set of storylines. I mean, honestly, we could do a 10-part list and they're all injuries. Do you know what I mean? Like there are 10 players minimally that I'm like, I need to see if this guy's healthy because that's a key for this team. And so I guess I've kind of grouped them a little bit, but number one for me is the rotation.
Right.
And we just spent quite a bit talking about Tyler Mahle, so we don't necessarily have to go in depth into him. But to me, the two biggest questions in the starting rotation, which is in my mind the deepest in terms of average or better options, and probably just overall the best group of starting pitchers the Twins have had, certainly, like Falvey said, in their 7 years, although that's not necessarily saying a whole lot. But I would say, I looked this up a little bit, I would say since basically Johan Santana's prime, the early to mid 2000s, when it was, Santana, and you had the end of Brad Radke's career, and then you had, guys like Loesch and Silva,
right?
Probably forget. Well, and then briefly you had Liriano, obviously, who was exceptional for a brief window. And you had Santana at the top of the rotation. He was the best pitcher in the world. Since then, and that's 20 years ago, roughly, I do think this is on paper the best rotation the Twins have had. Like we've talked about, they have 6. I don't want to say veteran starters, but they have 6 kind of established major league starters for 5 spots. But then beyond that, they also have Louis Varland, who's their back-to-back minor league pitcher of the year. They have Simeon Woods Richardson, who was a prospect acquired in the Jose Barrios trade, who looks very good. They have someone like Josh Winder, who we saw in kind of a dual role last year. Right. And then they still have some prospects, someone like Jordan Balazovic, who has to bounce back. And then, like we talked about on the Patreon quite a bit yesterday or 2 days ago, Chris Paddock, they're hoping to have in August and September. And so there are a few other guys too, but that's like 8, 9, 10 guys. And I'm not saying all those guys are all-stars or world beaters or whatever, but to me, those are all average or better, most likely starters. Now, the prospects might struggle a little bit early on, but I just can't remember a Twins rotation depth chart that looked anything like this. However, we talked about Mahle being a big question mark. He's essentially made 2 healthy starts for the Twins. And then Kenta Maeda is the other one that I have grouped in here, which Kenta Maeda said early on in camp. Well, he actually said it at Twins Fest first, but that he's ready to go. He's a full go. He will, I think he's gone, 18 or 19 months now between major league games.
Yeah.
Coming back from Tommy John surgery, elbow surgery, and was potentially talked about coming back in August or September of last year as a reliever. The Twins ended up scrapping that idea, with the point being kind of, we want to give him a full offseason, no setbacks, clean slate, to have him do what he's done now, which is show up at spring training 18 months removed instead of 13 months removed, whatever it is, and kind of be a full go. But within that, what does a full go mean for a 35-year-old guy coming off Tommy John surgery who hasn't pitched in a year and a half? So those two to me.
Well, and also Ober. I mean, let's not forget Ober. I mean, listen, those two are the veterans that we've got concerns about because we didn't see them last year. We also didn't see much of Ober last year, and part of that concern there is he's just never really had I don't think he's ever thrown 100 innings in a year right now with in minors or majors. I think he topped out in like 90s. Maybe 1 year he has, but he's always been somebody who's been somewhat limited. He had it doesn't seem like he had a major injury last year that he's coming back from. It was just sort of a core thing, but there's just sort of at some point you get sort of a track record of not really being particularly reliable, and when that happens. I actually asked him in the locker room yesterday, do you have an innings limitation, based on how little that you threw last year, and you haven't really ever built up yourself up to like 150 inning pitch guy. And his answer was, well, no, I don't have an innings limitation, but I also haven't talked to anybody about an innings limitation. I just arrived today. I haven't had that conversation yet, but I mean, that could be the case too. And especially that might be a special bummer given the fact that he might be headed to St. Paul early, and some of those innings might not even be for the whatever innings limits he might have might not even be for the Twins. For the Twins,
he's sort of his own innings limit, right? I mean,
right.
Realistically, I think he's either 26 or 27 years old. This will be his third major league season. Like you said, I mean, part of the reason he wasn't ever a top prospect was that he just threw 88 miles an hour at the time.
Right.
But another part of the reason was he would put up these exceptional kind of video game like numbers in single A, double A, and everyone would go, well, yeah, but I mean, he throws 88. So does the fact that he has 100 strikeouts and 11 walks really matter? And then beyond that, he, like you said, couldn't get past, 80, 90, 100 innings in the low minors or even the high minors because he would just inevitably have groin injury, hamstring injury, minor arm problems, nothing crazy recently. I mean, he hasn't had surgeries or anything like that, but he's had a lot of what they call soft tissue problems. And he's also just 6'9".
Right.
That's I'll say about him what I say about me. That's a lot of body to keep healthy. Mine's more, east-west. His is a little more north-south. But you know what I mean? It's just, it's a lot of muscles to keep functioning. And I guess with Ober, my question with him isn't so much like, is he healthy? It's more, can he stay healthy? Like, I'm assuming he's healthy right now.
Right, of course.
Whereas with Mahle and Maeda, you actually have to see, can we kind of reestablish the baseline of health and velocity and performance with them, and then you have to keep him healthy. Whereas with Ober, it's like, I'm willing to believe he showed up in camp feeling 99% or whatever. It's just, does that matter with him, or is he just kind of inevitably, instead of missing one start with a hamstring problem, he'll miss 4 starts with a hamstring problem or whatever? Because like you said, I mean, right now on paper, he's their 6th starter. He's their not least experienced because he has a little more experience than Joe Ryan, but I think Joe Ryan has certainly done more to earn a spot if it comes down to it. And Ober has a minor league option remaining, which means he can literally be sent to AAA. So yeah, you talked to him about this 2 days ago, and we discussed it on the Patreon. But like, if all 6 of their quality starters make it through spring training without any incident from a health standpoint, and none of them just get their brains beat in on the mound, I would probably bet on Ober going to AAA. And then you're saying yourself,
he could look like an absolute star here in spring training and still be the odd person out just because he's the one with the option. They're not going to, the rest of them are healthy and seem to be fairly reliable. He might still be the odd man out. So, although
I do wonder, like, if he is so, like, let's say he has the spring training of his life, which would be great. Is there sort of a threshold for performance that even if all 6 starters are healthy, they either just say, look, we can't sign him to AAA. He was our best pitcher for a month and a half. So are we either going to begin the year with a 6-man rotation, which they seemed less inclined to do, or could he just be in the bullpen?
I mean, this is obviously purely speculative on my part, but I would say absolutely not. There's nothing to indicate from this management team, right, that they're going to give up on one of their major assets to let Bailey Ober, who make the team either as a starter, right, which is one thing, and then also they're not going to bring him in as a reliever. They want him, if he looks good as a starter in spring training, they're going to send him down to St. Paul to look good as a starter in May.
Sure.
when somebody is inevitably hurt. They're not going to screw around with him in the bullpen.
I agree that's most likely, but it's easy to say before he potentially has a great spring. You know what I mean?
Yes, exactly right. Yeah,
but
right.
also to your point of
It's true.
they don't want to give up a great asset. Well, I mean, we'll see how the bullpen shakes out.
Right.
A couple
Yes,
relievers get
right.
hurt, and all you're giving up is Trevor McGill or whatever.
Let me then piggyback onto we can.
Okay.
That is going to be my.
So that's my number one. Was that also your first
was
one?
the health of the rotation? Yeah, health of the rotation is on my list. Yeah, that is one.
Which let me just add in before we move on to your number one or number two. You know, the guys that we're not focusing on here from a health standpoint, there are three other guys. You know, there's Mahle, Maeda, and Ober, but there's Joe Ryan has no health issues whatsoever, and then that's it basically. Sonny Gray had 3 different stints where he missed time with a hamstring problem last year, and is also just 33 and has not been the most durable pitcher over the course of his career. He's been very good, but he's more of a 130, 150 inning guy. So he's someone to watch, although I do think last year the abbreviated spring and the late start and the lockout kind of screwed him up a little bit. And then Pablo Lopez, who we've talked a lot about over the last month or so, but he threw 180 innings last year and he made 32 starts last year, both of which would have led the Twins, both of which were by far his career high. But he also has a history of shoulder problems, and he's healthy now, and he's coming off a season where he took a full workload and he didn't miss any time and anything like that. But 2 years ago, he missed time. 3 years ago, he missed time. And that looming over him, you know, was part of setting the acquisition price for him. In other words, if he hadn't have had any shoulder problems in his past, the asking price from the Marlins probably would have been higher. So even, you know, you've got Mahle and Maeda, who to me have big questions that need to be answered from a health standpoint. You have Ober, who has some questions that need to be answered from a health standpoint. Then you have Gray, who's like, well, we just got to keep him healthy because he's, you know, that's just his track record. And then you have Lopez, who's like, well, we'd love it if he just is past his shoulder problems, but we kind of have to find that out too. So almost every spot in the entire rotation could be counted on this. So yeah, my number one, I've included, I guess, 6 guys or 5 guys. Joe Ryan's healthy.
No, I am very interested to watch how the rotation comes together. I'm also just sort of a little interested in, you know, specifically, you know, how often, you know, do the Twins mess it around with, you know, Pablo Lopez now that he's here, and, you know, does he switch up his how often he's going to be using his changeup versus, you know, his curveball, or is he going to be relying more on the third pitch? I'm not sure that we're going to get a good sense of that during spring training. I think that's something that we're going to get a sense of during the actual season, but I am just kind of looking forward to seeing all of these guys and how they work things. So, no, you mentioned the bullpen and whether or not, you know, some of the guys that we have slated for, you know, possibly a starting rotation in St. Paul it would end up in the bullpen right here. And that's one of my questions is, what does the back end of this bullpen look like? You know, because right now, as I take a look at the 40-man roster, you know, we're going to have an 8-person bullpen, right? And as I take a look at the 40-man roster, I see basically 8 names on there that I have slated to be in the majors and be in the bullpen. And I don't have more than 8 names. I don't have, you know, and that doesn't include things like Cole Sands, who you know, we have slated for St. Paul.
Your guy, Cole Sands.
My guy, Cole Sands, right? Or Ronnie Enriquez, or, you know, whatever. Basically, we've got sort of the 6 guys that we feel like we can count on. And, you know, one of them is Alcala, who's still coming back from an injury, right? He's going to face some limitations early on. We'll see. And then you've got the other 2 that I think we just are kind of presuming are going to be on there are McGill and Miranda. And I'm just kind of wondering if we're going to see that of all the places where there's going to be, you know, some sort of spring training battle, that seems like that's the one that's going to be there. The rest of them, it feels to me, are more or less decided. It's good. You've got a clear inside person and a clear outside person. And I'm wondering if those 2, if the bullpen also matches that. Do we have a clear insiders and clear outsiders? Like, is it going to be those 8 guys? Is it going to be, you know, Duran and Lopez and Thielbar and Pagan and Jax and you know, and then the other 2 guys are going to be McGill and Moran? Or are we going to actually see
an alcohol?
We're going to see a non-roster invitee And Alcala, right? Are we going to see a non-roster invitee challenge that? Are we going to see some of the guys that they were slated for St. Paul challenge that? We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I'll predict this. You listed 8 relievers,
right?
Duran, Lopez, Jack, Steelbar, Alcala, Moran, Miguel, Pagan. That's how those are in some order, the top 8 of a depth chart. If I were to put together a depth chart, here's my prediction: that will not be the bullpen that begins.
Okay, all right.
For whatever reason,
how many names from that list are you guaranteeing will be on there?
I'd put
at least 6, right?
6.5 is the over under out of those 8.
Okay. All right.
I mean, look, how many?
I think I'd take the over, but I'm not sure I would.
That'd be an interesting bet. I do agree that I don't want to say locked in, but it's like it's more fully formed than a lot of recent Twins bullpens, because at this point in a lot of springs, we're like, oh, there's 3 spots for 9 guys competing for 3, and they're going through NRIs, they're going through prospects. I mean, there's just random guys. I do think that they have 8 guys that you can kind of give at least a half step above that, and 3 or 4 guys who are well clear of that competition level. But Alcala needs to answer, like you said, health question marks for sure. He hasn't pitched since like mid-April of last year.
Not to mention he's got to, not just get healthy, he's also going to be effective.
Right.
We did see him, felt like he started to turn a corner in towards the end of 2021, where he's finally able to locate that changeup a little bit and, showed some flashes of what he could be. But, if he's just healthy and he's not particularly effective yet, then maybe we'll see him, but we'll see him in May after he spent some time in St. Paul.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, like, because injuries become such the talking point on players, you almost are like, well, if Alcala is healthy, well, yeah, I mean, we're not talking about prime Mariano Rivera here. Like, he still has a lot to prove, even setting aside the injury question marks. I mean, that's true of a lot of guys that we're going to talk about today. It's like there's this thing where in your head you go like, well, if he's healthy, like Alex Kirilloff, who I'm sure we're going to talk about in a minute.
Yep.
Well, if Kirilloff's healthy, well, I mean, yeah, Kirilloff, what does he have? 80 good at bats in the majors at this point. There's also just you need to, if you're Alcala, like I do think Alcala, if healthy, will be a good reliever. But it's not like we have 7 years of that. I think Giovanni Moran, who I think we're both pretty big fans of. I was a believer in the second half of last year that they did themselves and him a disservice by not simply calling him up and letting him stay in the bullpen for 2 or 3 months at a time. I think they kept,
especially when you were using him as a long reliever,
right? I just think he is not. He's too good and too promising, and still young enough that you don't need to treat him like a Jarrell Cotton, a journeyman veteran, Juan Minaya type or something like that. And so my assumption is, given just how overpoweringly good he was when given a chance in the second half of last year, I think he finished with like 40 innings or something like that. My assumption this whole offseason has been, well, yeah, that he's in the bullpen. They want to see what he can do for 65 innings or 70 innings as the second lefty to Thielbar and all that, but that's not locked in. I mean, if he has a bad camp or misses a couple of weeks with a hamstring strain or something like that, he's got minor league options. He's hardly an established veteran who can't be sent down. And I think, I'm not a huge Trevor McGill fan. I mean, certainly you watch him throw 98 or whatever with a good curveball, and it's easy to see. It's easy to envision how he can be a really effective reliever. But, he struggles to consistently throw strikes. He's older. He's not a prospect. I mean, he's closer to 30 than he is, I think, even 25. He was very good at times last year, but by the time in the second half, when they really needed him to step forward from kind of a middle relief, low leverage role into a medium or high leverage role, I mean, he really had some ugly outings, where he just gets hit much harder than you would expect someone with his ability or his raw stuff to get hit. And so I would put him certainly 8th out of 8.
It feels like he hasn't quite figured out the mix. He's got the stuff. It's just the craft that he needs to continue to work on. So I don't know.
Yeah, and he's 29, and so by the way, Trevor McGill is 29 years old, and he has 68 career innings in the majors with a 6.03 ERA. Some with the Cubs, some with the Twins last year. Yeah. And so I think they like Trevor McGill. I think they wouldn't have kept him on the 40-man roster if they didn't have, a probable plan to have him in the bullpen to begin the season. But, if you're setting it at 6.5 as an over under of how many of those 8 are on the opening day roster, I think McGill is definitely, on the fence for that. So yeah, to your point of like, how is this thing going to shake out? I mean, I think there are 3 guys that you can point to who are, for various reasons, Moran, Alcala, and McGill, I think are definitely not a sure thing. So I guess in my mind, if you have 3 kind of 50-50 guys, that equals, an over under of 6.5 out of 8.
1 to 2 spots might be stolen away by somebody else. Yeah, I'm with you. And I'll tell you, maybe this is going to get into one of yours, but I don't see any other roster battles. I don't see many roster battles on that we're going to be able to talk about in spring training.
Right.
I don't know that we're going to be able to talk about the bench much. I don't think we're going to be able to talk about. We just talked about the starting rotation. I don't see that as a roster battle situation. It's just, is everybody healthy? If they are, then we know what we're doing, right?
Yeah.
With the bench, I don't see any roster battles. With the lineup, potentially you see a roster battle, maybe with the 2 out of the 3 of Kirilloff, Larnach, and Wallner end up going. But I think there's pretty clearly who the 2 inside horses are on that and who the outside horse is. So,
right.
Who the dark horse is. So, I just don't. It's going to be in that way. There isn't. I don't think there's a lot of drama around performance or poking around like who looks good. Unless we get some injuries, we're not
right.
going to have a lot of question marks heading into spring training.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think, it's not going to be like, oh, who outperformed whom to win this last bench spot or something like that. I think injuries are going to basically answer a lot of these questions for them, good or bad. And, it's also possible there's a trade or something like that. But yeah, I do think the last couple of, 2, maybe 3 spots in the bullpen, I definitely think are up for grabs. I also just think, to look at the bullpen big picture, this has the potential to be a really good bullpen. I think, if you look at like projections on, Baseball Prospectus or Fangraphs, right, or something like that, it does project to be one of the better on paper bullpens in the league. And, we saw last year that if you kind of compartmentalize Emilio Pagan from everyone else, it was one of the, right, the better. But a lot of that is just Duran continuing to be just an absolute monster for 70 innings.
Right.
He was himself like a top 5 bullpen. Like right. If you just give him even a below average supporting cast, I mean, he led the American League, I think, in win probability added for relievers. And so I'm not saying he's going to not be great, but he's a rookie. He's got 65 right. career innings or whatever. Right. And then even beyond that, I have a relatively a lot of confidence in I think Jax is for real what we saw last year. I think Thielbar is for real what we've seen the last 2 or 3 years from him. But Thielbar's 35. Right. And Jax has, again, 60 innings of relief work in his entire career. So, right. Those are hardly locked in. And then the biggest bullpen question for me, other than Pagan, which I'm still trying to not obsess about.
Yeah, I was going to say, you mentioned the 3 guys you weren't sure about, and I was like, I thought maybe we might want to throw Pagan in there as well. I don't know that he can have a camp so bad that he ends up not making the team, but I suppose.
Hey, let's not find out, huh? But Jorge Lopez is to me the biggest X factor here because
right.
They acquired him and gave up a good prospect in Cade Povich, lefty, that they sent to the Orioles at the trade deadline. They acquired him not for last year. I mean, they wanted him for last year, but for 2 more years, this year and next year under team control. But right. He just didn't throw strikes last year. And then when he did, he gave up too much contact. And his track record is essentially like 5 years of terrible pitching as a starter after being a top prospect, and then moved to the bullpen and was an all-star immediately, and then got traded to the Twins and wasn't good. And so there's so much reason for skepticism with him. And if you are not getting, I'm not saying they're expecting him to be the guy with a 1.5 ERA like he was for the Orioles, because that was going to come back down to earth no matter what. But if he's a setup caliber reliever for them, like they expect and hope, then a lot of things just kind of line up well behind that. You have him either closing or pitching setup in front of Duran, who's closing, and then you have Jackson Thielbar as your sixth, seventh, eighth guys, and then you don't need to rely on, let's say, Pagan as a seventh inning guy right away. You can ease Alcala in, all those things. But if you don't have Lopez, if Lopez continues to struggle and you have to begin the season with him in a middle relief role or in a mop-up role, which is where he was kind of relegated to after a while last season, well, then that changes quite a bit. Then I don't know that your bullpen is something you feel all that good about. So, yeah, I think between the 2 or 3 spots that are in some, competition and Alco's injury and also just the Pagan and Lopez factor of what version of this guy are we getting?
Right.
I do think like the bullpen itself, there are more kind of plot points or questions to be answered than the rest of the roster combined, probably.
I mean, the spread on where this bullpen could be is anywhere from elite
right
to below average.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And I mean, I like the upside of it, but yeah, there's plenty of question marks to go around. So
okay, so well, yeah, that was one of mine. The bullpen, I had that third.
Okay.
So I guess I'll say the one I had second, which is, lineup injuries. These are all sort of similar, obviously. But, I grouped them together kind of like we did with the rotation. But, the biggest one to me, and I might point to this other than maybe Mahle, but other than Mahle, I think Alex Kirilloff is, the biggest, the widest spectrum of kind of where this team could go based on one player. Which is, Alex Kirilloff has missed the majority of the past 2 seasons with a significant wrist problems and has had back-to-back season-ending surgeries, and even now is in camp and feeling pretty good, but still has some pain and is still, taking it easy on the workload in terms of swings per day and all that stuff. But we've seen in the brief windows we've seen where he's been even sort of healthy. I mean, he's just potentially a great hitter. I mean, he is an all-around, kind of prototypical number 3 hitter, which is just controls the strike zone, doesn't strike out a lot, just a visually pretty left-handed swing that's got some uppercut to it and some added some power to it. I mean, I think if he wouldn't have had the wrist problems the past 2 years, we'd be sitting here right now saying, well, the guy we don't have to worry about is Kirilloff. He's your number 3 hitter. He's,
right.
Going to hit 290 with 25 homers and maybe take another leap forward. Instead, it's like, well, okay, is he healthy at all? Will he even be on the opening day roster, or will he start the season in extended spring or on the injured list or whatever? And then from that point, what version of him are you going to get? Is it going to be a guy who is still kind of feeling his way through a twice surgically repaired wrist and maybe starts out as your 7 hitter or something like that?
Right. Yeah.
Platoon player, maybe he's taking days off, or does he just show up to spring training and maybe 2 weeks from now jumps into the game action and is just looking like he did as a top 25 global prospect, in which case all of a sudden you're looking at that lineup and you're going, oh wow, well, now you've got Kirilloff, after or between Correa and Buxton,
right,
and that takes on a completely different look. So I feel like Kirilloff, if we're ranking not necessarily most valuable players, but like the
pivot players.
Yeah, like where the 10th percentile,
where the season pivots
and the 90th percentile are the widest. I think Kirilloff is definitely the biggest one.
So we should just mention to people who aren't on the Patreon, we talked a little bit about this on Wednesday, but Kirilloff is a little limited coming into spring training in that they just want to make sure that he doesn't overdo his swinging. Basically, early,
right.
They're going to be sensitive about the volume of his swings, I think is the way it was explained early on. That I don't think anybody suggests that doesn't mean he should not be ready for opening day based, from a health perspective. Just means they're going to be maybe ramping him up a little slower on that, at least in, batting cage drills and that sort of thing. And I don't know what it means in terms of, when we might see him in a game.
Right.
I had a similar question, but a similar topic, but mine was just a little bit different. It was Kirilloff and Larnach, and both of them have some similarities, right? Both are the left-handers. They both have coming off of 2 years of injuries, essentially, right? Here's what is interesting to me about that: the Twins are counting on them to hold down the 2 most replaceable positions on the field and thrive at them.
Well, you're saying
right?
like the 2 places where the the acceptable bar for offense is the highest, basically.
Correct. Yeah, that's a good way. That's a good way to put it. Right. That first base engagement, but also the spots where if they don't work out, you can find other stuff.
Right.
Right. I mean, first of all, there's still free agents out there that are, have, a track record that exceeds the track record right now of Kirilloff and Larnach. Not that I would necessarily trust them going forward more. Right. It also means, at the trade deadline, if they want to go and find something like that's, finding a good bat is something you can find at the trade deadline. That's a simple enough thing to do. So they not only have to be, stay healthy. They not only have to perform, they almost have to perform it. They can't kind of hit, right? They've got to hit. And also we should just mention internally, there's options there as well, right? Like you've got Wallner, who we saw last year. You've got, other guys coming up behind them.
You also just have Miranda, who could be shifted back to first base or
DH. And by then, maybe Brooks Lee can be taking over third base, or Royce Lewis gets healthy again, or Austin Martin has a breakthrough year, or Ed Julien ends up shining in AAA the way I think a lot of people are kind of wondering he might do.
Right.
So they not only have to stay healthy, they not only have to perform, but they also have the potential to be really, really good, like to hit well enough to be a first baseman / DH asset in Major League Baseball for years, to have a long career. Right. So I'm just fascinated by this spread and the challenges that they have. It's a very unique kind of challenge. These guys weren't supposed to be first baseman and DH necessarily. They were supposed to hit. They're supposed to be a corner outfield. The corner outfield spots are taken right now, at least. So,
yeah, no, I agree. I had, number 2 item, just lineup health, and I had Kirilloff number 1. I had Larnach on that list, and then obviously Buxton, and to some extent Polanco I also listed too. We talked about Polanco on the Patreon, but there isn't, Buxton's not even in camp yet, or if he is, he just got there today. But he's healthy, but coming off knee surgery, coming off 6 months essentially spent in the trainer's room just to prepare himself to play, 2/3 of the Twins games or whatever it ended up being, 90 something games, I think.
Right.
And so, I don't know that there's going to ever be a spring, or has ever been a spring, when Byron Buxton is not some level of question mark from a health standpoint.
Right. Yeah. He's always been on this top 5 list. I mean, not just from the health standpoint, but also from the, what are we going to get from Buxton this year standpoint, or what are we, where are they going to bat Buxton this year standpoint, or,
I mean, I do think Kirilloff has the widest spectrum of he could either not take an at bat for the Twins this year, or he could be, their third best player. Obviously Buxton, in terms of upside, is as high as anybody in the entire world right now. Right. Or he could miss, half the games again, or more, or whatever. I think, all indicate, we'll know better 3 days from now, but all indications are that he is healthy for Byron Buxton standards. Now, that knee, it might not be something that just was fixed, quote unquote. It might be something that feels significantly better than it did last season, and the specific problem has been addressed. But I don't know that he's I don't know that he's free from knee issues, or having to,
or hip issues, or whatever. Right?
Yeah, or having to manage that to be in the lineup. Now, what does that mean? I think part of the value of getting someone like Michael Taylor, is they finally have in place a veteran fourth outfielder who, whether Buxton misses 25 games or 125 games, can step into the lineup and provide similarly excellent defense. Now, the offense isn't going to be anywhere close, but that you're not kind of sent scrambling every time Buxton misses more than a few games. And, you're not going to see Jake Cave out there. You're not going to just see Celestino out there way before he was ready. And so hopefully, whether you're expecting Buxton to play half the games or 2/3 of the games, or whatever your expectation is, I think having Taylor at least needs to be kind of factored into that. But yeah, I mean, to me, the rotation questions that we went over are the biggest thing. The second biggest thing to me is just what's the status of Kirilloff and Buxton and Larnach and to some extent Polanco? Because I mean, those are four of, if everything goes right, those are four of your top, I don't know, 6 hitters basically in a lineup, in a good lineup.
I grouped Kirilloff and Larnach together as one because, not just the health questions, everything else. I also grouped Buxton and Polanco together as another one of mine because you're talking about 2 veterans who, really they're counted on to be the middle of this lineup. Like you got Correa. We're all excited that Correa's there. If Buxton and Polanco aren't healthy, Correa's by himself. Maybe with Miranda, we'll see, right? Which might be another good question, but
that's my next one on my list.
Okay, well, we'll get into that one. But my Buxton and Polanco, sort of, you've got 2 veterans who both ended the season hurt, and both have injury histories, and I think we will have a sense within the first week or 2 of spring training whether or not they are past last year's injuries.
Right.
That doesn't mean that they can't have new injuries this year, right? Now, new things to deal with, but if either of those 2 come back in and they don't look 100%, this team looks vastly different to me in terms of what I can expect from them offensively this year. So
yeah, I agree. Wait, so am I saying another one or are you saying?
Yeah, you go ahead. You hit Miranda. You already touched on Miranda. Let's do that one.
Miranda, have you seen Miranda? Does he indeed look sexy as Carlos Correa?
I have seen Miranda.
Yeah,
it's all I could do to stop hitting on him. Yeah.
Did you do the old radio hands on a hard body? Yeah, Miranda?
I did not.
Have you ever seen that?
I don't know what that is.
Well, it sounds great, doesn't it?
It does sound great.
I think this was like a 90s thing, but I remember like local radio stations, maybe even Howard Stern, would like bring a woman in and she would like sit on a car, like lay down on a car.
Okay.
And the idea was like 10 people would put their hand somewhere on her and the last one still with their hand on her would win the car. So it was like endurance, but also creepy because it was like a woman in a bikini probably.
Right.
So it was called, I just remember, maybe this was Howard Stern. It was called Hands on a Hard Body. And,
how many days would this last?
Oh, multiple days. Like,
would they have to be there 8 hours a day, or would they be there 24 hours a day?
Yeah, 24 hours a day. Yeah.
Did she get a break?
That's a good question. Unclear. Maybe she just. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, 11-year-old me was like, "That's an amazing name for a." It's got
to be Stern because I don't know anything about it.
Yeah. So anyway, John put his hands on Jose Miranda.
That's right.
Yeah, Jose Miranda.
He looked good on that car, though. I got to tell you.
What kind of car was it? What kind of rental did you get?
I got a Camry.
Oh,
kind of a dull one this time. There wasn't a great selection, and I didn't want to go get a big truck. I feel stupid driving a truck.
I wanted a Rolls Royce or a Maybach, but the Athletic capped the spending, so I couldn't do that. So I think I have like a Honda.
I got a sensible Camry. Is what I got.
That's what I got too. I think. Yeah. So yeah, Jose Miranda. Let's not talk about him as if he was some big fatso in the first place. But there was a sense, I think, last year, his first full year in the majors, and he felt like he wore down a little bit physically in September. He was so good in the summer months. He started very slow. He briefly gets demoted. He comes right back up, and then he was just on fire, for 2 or 3 months there. And then in September, once he was kind of getting an opportunity to be an everyday player at that point in the middle of the lineup, often he faded a little bit. Not terrible, but he faded a little bit. And so I know Correa talked to him about this a lot, and they, I think, worked out together in the offseason. And Miranda just made it a priority to get into better shape physically, lose some pounds. It sounds like, increased flexibility and conditioning in general. And then also with an eye on moving back full-ish time to third base, which was his position throughout the minors. I mean, he was drafted as a shortstop because everybody gets drafted as a shortstop, but he played some second base in the minors, played some short, but he was mostly a third baseman in the minors. And, he didn't look good at first base. I don't know that necessarily means he's incapable of playing third base. I think a lot of the stuff that we saw from him at first base was just a guy who didn't quite know what he was doing at first
Right,
base.
yeah, right. Because he had not played much first base.
Right. He had
Right.
taken kind of a crash course at AAA at third base, or at first base, excuse me. But yeah, I mean, he's got, I think I looked, he has like almost 2,000 career innings at third base. And, you know, playing a position a lot doesn't mean you're good at it, obviously, but it does mean you know where to go and how to react to just sort of random plays that happen to a third baseman more so than you would at first base. So I think that's part of the hope with Miranda. And then also they're hoping that he's in better shape and he's got a little bit more, you know, quick twitch to him. You know, his first step might be a little quicker, or he might be able to have a little bit more range and all that, which is going to be essential at third base. But yeah, I mean, I just think Miranda overall is super interesting to me because he's shown clearly that if things go well for him, he can be a middle of the order, right-handed power hitting bat for years to come. But the question is, is there kind of one more step to him offensively than what we saw last year? Or is he just sort of a good, 20 homer, 280 type of hitter, which would be fine. I mean, they take that. Or is there, is there
Especially
more power?
base.
Right. But is there most rookies, you would say, all right, well, if they had a 120 OPS as a rookie, you would expect them to at some point get to 130, let's say, or something like that. Is that in the cards for Miranda? And then beyond that, where's he going to play defensively? Because that's key. Because as we talk about all these guys like Kirilloff and Larnach and Wallner and everybody coming up, being able to play Miranda at third base keeps first base and DH open for those other guys. Whereas if you move Miranda to first base or DH primarily, yes, he's still in the lineup. That hasn't changed. But then all of a sudden you have to remove Kirilloff or Larnach or Wallner or whoever from the lineup because you don't have those same two spots, and you have to find a third baseman. And so,
which is probably like right now Kyle Farmer or maybe Nick Gordon. Right. It's just right.
And so, yeah, that's why I think Miranda is a really interesting guy to watch. He's also I'm glad to not be discussing an injury, to actually have it be a question mark that isn't just, is this guy healthy?
Jesus, I'm knocking on wood right now.
Yeah, don't go trip him in the hallway after you get out of I'm picturing John opening the door to the room he's in after we sign off from the podcast and hitting Miranda in the face with the door or something like that now after we've said this, but don't do that. But yeah, just the transition to third base is kind of interesting. I personally don't think he's going to be a good third baseman, but I do think he can be a acceptable third baseman for a year or two or three. I think he can be a third baseman where you don't think of him as bad. You just go, yeah, he's okay over there. He doesn't make every play, but he makes most plays. And I think it's key, like I just said, to have that, even if he's not great over at third, to add flexibility to the rest of the lineup. I've also talked to, for instance, Roy Smalley, who has played slightly more infield in the major leagues than me, say he thinks Jose Miranda is going to be a really good third baseman. He's convinced that 3 years from now, we're going to be talking about Miranda as maybe not a Gold Glover, but a guy that's well above average. And there are people in the Twins organization who feel the same way. And so I'm very curious to see, this new in better shape Miranda. What does it look like just from a speed standpoint, a range standpoint, third base? What can he do offensively? Is he already kind of established as a core player at this point, or do we still need to see maybe some more growing pains till he gets there? So yeah, I think that's the non-injury one that I have the highest on my list.
Because I haven't had a chance to talk to Miranda yet. I'm looking forward to it, but I did do a little research on, how much he had played third base in the minors, how much he had played first base and such in the minors. And you just talked about, I'll be interested to see the transition to third base. That's not the transition, right? The transition was last year trying to play first base. Last year at first base, he had twice as many innings as he had his entire minor league career. Like 6 years in the minors, he had more innings at first base that first year in the majors than he had his entire time in the minors. He had less innings at first base in the minors than he had at shortstop in the minors.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, he didn't play first base, period. So judging how he did, and literally he played, like 7 times more at third base than he played at first base. And five or six times more at second base than he did first base. First base is one of the places he played least in the minors throughout his career, right? So the idea that I think what we're gonna see where they thought his natural position was this year, and I guess it's not surprising to me that they want to try that at least,
right.
Try that out and see how that goes. And I'm probably more optimistic about his ability to play that spot than I was. I think it's just hard for us, having watched a guy struggle at the easiest position on the baseball field last year, to wipe that from our minds and give him the benefit of the doubt, the fact that he's not played there at all right now.
Yeah,
we did see him a little bit at third base last year. He didn't look fantastic at third base. I never once took a look and went, oh wow, he's really there's Brooks Robinson over there. I didn't get that sense of watching him play third base. But I also, like, when I thought of, oh, this guy's got some learning to do, I don't remember it ever happening at third base. I remember it always being at first base.
I mean? To me, first of all, I'm shocked that you are, in terms of opinion, siding with multi-time Major League All-Star shortstop Royce Mahle versus no-time Little League All-Star Aaron Gleeman. But yeah, I mean, I think Miranda at third, to me, both what we saw and then just talking to people about him actually as he was coming up through the minors, I think the arm is going to be more stretched than the range.
Okay, well, could be. Yeah, could be.
I don't maybe he's improved his range even more because he's gotten into better shape and everything. So that would be encouraging, obviously. But I just think to great third basemen, someone like Nolan Arenado or Matt Chapman or somebody like that, right. Or even Gary Gaetti going back in Twins history. For that matter, even Josh Donaldson, these dudes have a cannon. Right. And even Miguel Sano, who was not a great third baseman, but Miguel Sano could make plays at third base that Jose Miranda will never make at third base. Right. Like Miguel Sano would backhand a ball going into foul territory past the third base bag, and you'd think, well, there's no way he's getting the ball to first, and then he would just throw a 94-mile-an-hour P to first base and nail the guy, and you'd go, oh my God. Well, yeah, I mean, then there were 5 routine plays that he wouldn't make at third base, but I just think without a 80th percentile or higher throwing arm or arm strength at third base, there's kind of a cap to certain plays that you can make, and I think that's going to be a bigger issue than range with Miranda. I'm not saying he has a weak arm by any means. I mean, he has a good arm. I mean, look, he probably has one of the 1,000 best throwing arms in the world.
Right.
But
and in fact, I mean, he played third base throughout the minors. You can't do that if you've got a weak arm. Right.
But there are going to be some plays, and there were some plays last year where, he'll get to a ball, but he really needs to hurry, and he kind of have to make an off-balance throw or whatever, and, the throw is just a half second short, or he bounces it there or whatever.
Right,
and
yeah.
you don't see those plays and go, oh, wow, he really screwed up, because he didn't screw up. But his ceiling for that is a little bit lower. With that said, I don't know that Gio Urshela had an exceptional arm or anything like that, but he was just very, very smooth at third base. So that's what I'm curious about with Miranda. I think,
and the fact that he also played a fair amount at second base might support that perception.
Right.
You know what I mean? That if he's just got a cannon over at third base, they're not screwing around with him at second base too often.
Sure.
They left that back door open for him, and usually when you leave that back door open, that back door is there because you're a little worried that he might not have the arm to compete at that level at third base. So.
Right. I mean, just to be clear, I don't think he's a bad third baseman. I just think average might be his, good case scenario, basically, which is fine. I mean, they would, if you told the Twins today, Jose Miranda is going to play third base for only 3 years, and he's going to be slightly below average defensively, they would gladly sign up for that.
Sure. Yeah, for sure.
Because a slightly below average defensive third baseman with his bat is, a borderline all-star type of player. And as we've discussed now a billion times, it keeps first base open. It keeps DH open. So yeah, they would and so I do think that's very realistic as sort of an outcome for him, but he has to show that. Okay. What's your next one?
My last one, because I think we've hit all the rest of them.
I only have one left, but
are the shift. I want to see the shift.
That's a good one.
Oh shoot! Actually, I'm going to change it to rule changes because I want to see both the shift and I want to see the pitch clock.
Okay.
I had both of those down as sort of my things. I want to see, Jason Stark put out a story, I think, this week about, what a S show it could be in spring training as people adjust to the pitch clock. And, but they, baseball players, I'd like to test boundaries, and they're going to be testing the boundaries early, and it's going to be up to the umpires to actually enforce something like this, right? And we'll see if they actually do. Every other time they've tried to speed up the game, that's where it's fallen down, right? As ultimately had trouble kind of getting the enforcement to be there. I will be interested to see if people are pushing back for that, and I'll be interested to see just to experience. I went to a few different AAA games last year to experience. My experience overall was that I didn't really notice it. But I also didn't notice when there was 45 seconds in between a pitch, which I would experience when I was in a Major League Baseball game.
Right.
I would get to the fourth inning and I'd be like, or fifth inning, some critical piece, and I'd be like, why? How many? And then I'd start timing it, and like, this seems to be going really slow, and it'd be 45 seconds or a minute between pitches, and
which is just a killer.
It's just,
yeah,
right. No,
I agree.
And at the end of the time, I'm like, I didn't really notice that we had a pitch clock, and I did notice that I'm out of here 20 minutes earlier than I normally am.
Yeah, I mean,
so that's one.
I think
one. I'm sorry.
The pitch clock. There's the shift, obviously,
right,
which we talked a lot about all season. I feel like there's they unveiled all the new bases yesterday, the day before.
Yeah. I'm looking at the slightly larger bases right now.
It was really funny because every beat writer who was there took they unveiled them on the third baseline or whatever, and everybody took their little iPhone photos and posted them on Twitter. And then somebody, I forget who it was, but a parody account or whatever, took those photos and then shrunk down the old base and increased the size of the new base, but in a way that was not like completely obvious.
Right.
And just tweeted it as news, like, here are the new bases, and people were like, "Oh my god, the new base is like twice as big." I'm like, "No, it's not." I mean, it's noticeable, but it's nothing. It's not that crazy,
right? I was at opening day last year for the Saints, and they had the new larger bases in AAA last year, and I think it was opening day before the game. They had on each of the bases, like, it was like 1 yard by 1 yard. These enormous bases around them. We're really excited about trying the new bases, and then they go and pick them up and put them. Right. I mean, great.
It's kind of like the shift, right? I mean, we've talked a lot about this. I'm very curious to see. This is a good one that you picked. I didn't think to put this on the list, so it's good you did. But like, I generally believe that the impact of the shift limitations, and let's be clear, they're not eliminating the shift. They're limiting the shift. We're going to see, you may see as many shifts. They will just not be as extreme as they were. They will be more like shifts were 10 years ago, which there's still plenty of shifts. I generally, Jesus, why do I keep saying that? Think that the expectation there is overblown. I don't think the impact will be as big as everyone is kind of assuming. And I think it's sort of similar with the bases. Like, I think in people's heads, they're like, oh man, they put like, it's like bumper bowling versus regular bowling or something like that. Like, it's just a completely different. No, it's like a guy's going to get to the base with his foot or his finger, a tenth of a second earlier than he would have. Now, you do that every pitch for every game all season, and it will have an impact. I do think teams are going to run more. I do think you're going to see stolen base percentages go up across the league, but is it going to go from 75% to 85%? No. I mean, it might go up 2 percentage points or something like that, because here's the other thing. Stolen base percentage is going to go up because they have less distance to travel between bases, obviously. Except if everyone knows that, it's not like they're unaware that the dimensions have changed. And so you're going to see teams attempt more steals, which means you're attempting more steals that are not in ideal circumstances, and or you're allowing or pushing players who normally wouldn't attempt as many steals to do so. You're asking Max Kepler to attempt 10 steals instead of 5 steals. Well, those aren't necessarily the highest, or Jorge Polanco might try 15 instead of 12 or something like that. Those aren't necessarily the highest percentage opportunities. And so you're going to see the league-wide percentage go up, but I actually think it's part of it is going to then be dragged back down a little bit because the caliber of player attempting steals is going to be lower.
Well, that's probably true.
Yeah. It's more of just,
but I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled to see more of a running game period.
Oh, I agree.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
So. I completely agree. So yeah, running more, shifting, pitch clock. There was one other one. What else am I,
a ghost runner.
Yeah. Well, we've seen plenty. But yeah, I think the pitch clock's going to be the biggest thing. I think the pitch clock's going to be the biggest thing in terms of noticeability, I guess I would say.
Right.
And I think it's going to be the biggest thing early on because pitchers are going to hate it. And so
I'm going to be interested in watching the shift. I'm going to be interested in watching the Gallo and Kepler at bats. I would just see if that changes their approach at all. Like, screw it. I mean, Kepler at least was nominally trying to go opposite field on a regular basis last year, at least early. If they're just like, you know what, screw it. I'm just going to pull the ball as much as I want to see what happens. Swing away on that stuff. I'm kind of interested to see if we can notice different approaches during the at-bats in spring training this year.
Yeah. I mean, you're also going to see, because the limits that they've put in place are you have to have two infielders on each side of second base as the pitch is thrown. And part of that is they have to have both feet on the dirt before the pitch is thrown. So you can't like send a guy in motion, which I know initially a couple teams were talking about. Like, you kind of put your third baseman in motion and he runs into, short right field by the time the pitch is delivered. They have to be kind of stationary, relatively, two guys on each side. Well, within that, you can still put the first baseman guarding the line and put the second baseman in short right field. You just leave the middle of the field open, except you can move the shortstop to basically equal, parallel to second base, and you can move the third baseman to shortstop. I think most people looking at that type of arrangement are not going to see a huge difference between what they saw the last couple of years in shifting. Now, there are a couple different holes, and you're not quite covered as much on the right side for left-handed hitters, but you can also, there's nothing, I'm curious if this changes next year, but there's nothing stopping teams from bringing an outfielder in, going with a two-man outfield occasionally, and just putting the outfielder in short right field to act as a shifted second baseman.
Right. The interesting thing about that is, where did the two outfielders play, right? Because what you end up doing, I think the thought process, from a sabermetric perspective, I think the thought process would be, well, I mean, if he hits it real hard, he's going to hit it to right field over the right fielder who's now playing basically like a deep second base, right? We don't want it there. So we move our center fielder into right field, and we move our left fielder into center field, and we dare them to try and hit opposite field, past opposite field in the air to left. Like, they just can't do that. Well, that's interesting. So you get a ground ball that somehow goes through the left side of the infield, because you've got the shortstop shading over to second. You've got the second baseman way over, and the third baseman, it gets past that third baseman, you've got an inside the park home run problem.
Right.
Like, that was going to be fun, man.
I think what I would do is, like, when a Kepler is at bat, a very strong pull side left-handed hitter, I would definitely go to the most extreme shift you possibly can to defend him. I think I would I would bring in the left fielder, probably. I mean, this depends on personnel a little bit, but I would bring in the left fielder and just have them play like basically short right.
Deep second. Yeah.
Yeah, deep second. And then you could kind of play the third baseman. You could play him to pull
plays
a little bit.
Like deep shortstop kind of.
Right, but like deep, close to the grass. So that if you do kind of inside out a pitch, to the opposite field, like a check swing, swing, it's not an automatic double then at that point, because there's at least a third baseman kind of over there. So I think that's how I would approach it. But yeah, to your point, I'm all for, kind of murky waters. I'm all for blurred lines. I'm all for teams having to figure these things out on the fly, because I think that makes for interesting strategy. And I think it, like, the chaos of it, or the uncertainty of it, is interesting.
I love the chaos. One of the things you said, but the third baseman, remember, has to stay in the infield though.
Right.
So he can only shade so much to the outfield there, but yes, he could play back, so that if something gets past him as shortstop over there, he can turn and run 100 yards.
I think
back to the warning track.
I think if you just showed this to like a kid and said, like, how should you put people, the initial one would be just leave first, second, short, and third kind of in their normal spots, and just bring one of the outfielders in and have them play. What's the position in softball? It's called it's between second base and center field.
Right. Yeah,
I forget what it's called, rover or something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
Except the problem, so you could basically put the left fielder between the second base bag and where the center fielder is, essentially somewhere in there. And so if you hit a ball right up the middle, they're where a shifted shortstop has often been in the past 5 years. However, the problem with that is they'll get to the ball, but then what's a left fielder going to do with it? Right. Like you brought a left fielder who by definition have usually the worst throwing arm in the outfield and are not capable of being a infield caliber throwing arm. They're going to field it behind the second base bag and then spin and throw a guy out at first base. Like that's not going to happen ever. Right. Maybe Joey Gallo, cause he's played third base before, could do that. But so anyway, I'm very curious about that. Okay. So, I only have one more and you're done, right?
And
so
I'm done. Yeah.
We can end on this. There's a lot of overlap. Okay. My last one is which prospects emerge. And I don't mean emerge as a prospect. I mean this time last year,
right?
We weren't sure what the situation was with Duran or Winder, Miranda for that matter, and it ended up that
Royce Lewis for that matter.
Well, and Royce Lewis. Duran and Winder both made the team out of spring training as relievers, and Duran obviously was their best pitcher all season and was incredible. I'm not expecting anybody to reach those heights, but you also had Joe Ryan in the rotation all year as a rookie, and then like we said, Miranda basically became a key cog of the lineup for the last 4.5 months of the season or something like that, and so that's a lot of graduates from prospectdom to majors. Like it was lost because of all the injuries and everything. But to have Duran, Winder, Ryan, and Miranda all kind of join the core, Winder to a less extent because he's still sort of a question mark. But that is huge, not only for last season, but just now, because now we're talking about these guys. When we were talking about the rotation earlier, I was like, well, Ryan's the one I have the least questions about. Well, imagine that last year. So from the group that they have now in place, I think the most likely scenario is that one of the position player prospects emerges similar to like Miranda last year, where they get a look. There's some injury, there's some poor performance by a veteran. Come, May or June, someone like Wallner gets called up.
Yeah, Wallner's the obvious one here, right?
Right. Someone
maybe Julian.
Right. I think Royce Lewis would be that guy, except he's unlikely to be available because he's coming off torn ACL again until June or July at best. I think Brooks Lee is their best prospect, but Brooks Lee has played like 30 games above college.
Right.
But I mean, if he ended last year at Double A, if he begins this year at Double A, which is not certain, but I'm guessing that'll be the case. I should ask somebody about that. But once you get to Double A, we've talked about this a lot. You can force the issue from Double A. If he goes to Double A to begin this year and he hits 350 for 6 weeks, he'll at minimum be promoted to Triple A.
Right.
And once you're at Triple A, I mean, he might get promoted from Double A, the majors, if he does that. And so, is Brooks Lee likely to be on this team in the first half? No. I mean, he's 21 years old. He just got drafted. I mean, that would be making the majors sooner than 1 calendar year from the point you were drafted. That so rarely happens. But I don't think it's impossible. I mean, if someone gets hurt or someone needs to shift positions or someone just struggles or there's a trade, I think Brooks Lee has a chance. I think Wallner for sure. I think Julian for sure. I think Austin Martin is a guy they could plug in basically anywhere if he gets off to a decent start. I'm assuming at AAA, and then come mid-season, they're hoping that Royce Lewis enters that mix. And so, and then the question with Royce Lewis is, do they treat him, because of the back-to-back injuries? Do they treat him as a guy who's a major leaguer, or do they treat him kind of like it was at this point last year, where they send him to the minors and say, play yourself to the majors? Because he's already done that.
Right.
Except does that slate get kind of wiped clean? I mean, he's already played, 6 good weeks at AAA and then 12 great games with the Twins. Like, has he banked that to the point that once he's healthy, he just goes back to the majors?
I don't think so.
I don't either.
I'll be shocked. I'll tell you but here's what I like about this one. I think this was a really good one. I'm disappointed I didn't think about it. I like this. The Twins have so many of their prospects so close to the majors.
Yes.
That, and frankly, a lot of them, oddly enough, we haven't really seen. I haven't really paid any attention to Julian before this year, right? And Wallner, for that matter. I mean, even though he made it last year, like, he wasn't somebody I was watching closely in spring training last year. And then Brooks Lee, who wasn't even in the organization in spring training last year, right? Like, so there's a lot of great names there that are pretty close, and we're going to get to see them, pay attention for a lot of time. And I'll add this as well. The second thing I like about this one, a World Baseball Classic is going to be taking a lot of time from a lot of people. And I think you're going to get a little more opportunity to see some of these guys. The fact that they are close to the majors means they are a little bit more likely to stick around. What happens a lot of the time with, some of these top prospects is you see them for the first week and a half of games, and then they are sent down just to listen. Right. We're not going to screw around with you or your hopes or, all the speculation about keeping you on the roster to the end. You're not making it with the team right now. You're slated for Wichita. You're slated for St. Paul, right? That's what we want you to be. But these guys are close enough. I think they're going to stick around a little bit more, in part just to experience hanging out with the veterans and to, get to know each other so that when they get called up, it's, they already know who these guys are. And so I think we're going to be able to see them for a few extra weeks. I think the World Baseball Classic lends itself to that because you're going to have a few extra spots to be playing on that. And I think we're going to get a real chance to kind of get a sense for some of these guys' games. So I'm very excited about that one.
Yeah. And I mean, I think to your point that I wrote about this, like on my top 40 list or whatever, like the Twins don't have an upper echelon farm system, but what they do have is, I think, an average-ish overall farm system. But what they do have is a handful of AA and AAA upper minors hitting prospects who, like you just said, are all, I think, individually better than 50% to reach the majors this year. Maybe right. Lee is not, but I still think he will. If I list off Lee, Lewis, Wallner, Martin, Julian, that is potentially 5/9 of a long-term lineup for the Twins in some, right. Fielding order. Then think of the guys we just talked about. Miranda, who's essentially a year removed from being a prospect. Kirilloff, Larnach, who are, they're not technically prospects, but they might as well be in terms of what they have or haven't proven and all that stuff. And so you start to add those guys. Well, now I've just named 8 guys. Now, I don't know how it necessarily works defensively, but, those 8 guys, the 5 prospects plus Kirilloff and Larnach and Miranda, that's basically like could be a long-term lineup from that group. Then you also have Buxton and Correa and some other guys that you're going to continue to build around, obviously. And so to me, it's like one of the things I enjoy most, and we've talked about this a lot, actually, because it's happened like 2 times, I feel like, since we've been doing the podcast, which is to watch kind of in real time how one core transitions into another core and who from the previous core, if you look at the Twins, it was the Buxton, Barrios, Sano, Kepler, Polanco, that Rosario, that group. To see now those guys are nearing 30 and some of them are already gone via free agency or trades or whatever. To see who from that core is then kind of the bridge to the next core. And obviously it'll be Buxton, who signed for 6 more years, and it could be Polanco. It could be, whoever you want to point to in that front. And then how many of the guys that we're kind of dreaming on here as prospects, the guys we just mentioned on the hitting side, how many of them will transition to kind of fill in the gaps left by the old core guys leaving? And then what you're left with, hopefully, is a lineup that a year from now or 2 years from now has Brooks Lee, Royce Lewis, Matt Wallner, Austin Martin, but also Carlos Correa, Byron Buxton, Jose Miranda, hopefully Kirilloff.
Right.
And, some of that's not going to work out. Some of those guys are going to get hurt. Some of those guys are going to be traded. Some of those guys are going to be not as good as everyone thought and all that. But I do think this year has the potential to really be a blending of the last kind of vestiges of the previous core, bridging to the first real wave or the first real consistent contributions, which was started last year by like Miranda, but of the next core. And I think that's super interesting. And I also just think it gives them a lot of coverage. There's very few spots in the lineup right now that if you said the veteran that's there right now is going to get hurt, who replaces them? And if it happens in April, who knows? But if it happens in June, you got coverage all over the infield with Brooks Lee and Austin Martin and Julian, and you got coverage in the outfield with Wallner, and then Royce Lewis comes back. And then we haven't even mentioned on the pitching front, prospect-wise. Right. You know, we talked about Varlin, Simeon Woods Richardson, when we talked about the rotation earlier. For that matter, Giovanni Moran is still technically a prospect in the bullpen.
Sure.
Enriquez is a prospect.
Yeah, you got to be the legs of Belazovic, who took a step backwards, but has a lot of upside. It does make it one of the things that I think makes this year kind of an exciting year. You find, look back to like the last really good wave of Twins teams. 2006 was the year that if you're taking a look back now, you take a look and say that was the year they really should have maybe broken through, because you had still the holdovers from the old group and you had the youngsters from the new group.
Right.
And they were blending, and that's why that team had so much upside, and it also produced a batting champion and an MVP and a Cy Young winner. Like, that was when you get, one generation, one wave overlapping with another wave. That's when, you can have far reaching results. And it feels like, this year has a chance for that. I mean, frankly, it felt like last year had a chance for that.
Right.
But injuries just devastated that. It feels like this year has a chance for that. And now it almost feels like next year has a chance for that as well. And it's also why I think it's so critical that they have, 4, pretty high upside, starting veteran pitchers to sort of hold things down. You've got a lot of options on the hitting side. You still, and they still have some options on the pitching side. Don't get me wrong. But it's nice to have that core there to say, listen, on almost an everyday basis, we should be in these games. And now it's just up to the lineup to find out which of these guys are going to step forward, whether it's Larnach and Kirilloff getting over their problems, or some of the new prospects that are, waiting for their turn, or Miranda, trying to advance from. Let's not forget, like 2021 was his breakthrough year. 2022, we were just hoping that 2021 wasn't a mirage.
Right.
And instead he stepped in and, listen, he wasn't dominant all year, but he was dominant for at least like a month. And, then they made some adjustments. Now he's got to make some adjustments while learning third base. So, you're just looking for him to take a step forward. I don't know. It feels to me like there's a lot of interesting individual development threads to be watching here. And when you have that much stuff there, the potential for a wave for those to come together and really propel things as a team is there. That's what makes this year so exciting, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Okay. We each had, I think there were like 3 that overlapped. So instead, out of 10 possible places, I believe we had either 6 or 7 actual,
that's right,
legitimate different.
Yeah, things. A little bit. We tailored them a little bit differently.
I'll take it.
Yep.
Okay. So that's it for today.
Yeah.
Thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring the show. Yep. BetterHelp.com/Gleeman.
We will be talking to you in person next Friday. If you're just downloading the free podcast, we'll be back in person talking to each other. And if not, if you want even more, if you want to really wait around in spring training for a little bit, we would suggest you just try the Patreon. It's $1. What do you get to lose?
Yeah.
And check that out. We'll be back on Monday to talk through probably Aaron's first trip to the clubhouse and what he's learned.
You'll get to hear what travel-based complaints I have, or what,
and whether or not you're able to rent a car this year.
Yeah, did I get a car? Was I booted from the airport? What did they lose my luggage?
Who's doing your laundry this year?
Well, that's the big question that is looming over the entirety of spring training, really. Yeah. So if you want more, we would love to have you join us now that we're really ramping up. We're going to both be in Florida starting Sunday. Join us for the spring training into opening day. It costs you $1 when we put out a new episode on the Patreon. If we don't put out a new episode for a while, it costs you nothing. We would really love you to join us, and we think you'll like it too. So it's Patreon, Patreon, patreon.com/Gleeman. John, I will be in your embrace within the next
Oh, God.
72 hours.
All right.
Will you wait for? Can I jump into your arms when I get off the plane? Do you think we
Yeah.
could set that up? It's a little harder security wise post 9/11.
It's gonna be like Lucy with the Charlie Brown on the football, but yeah,
You just
try that.
I could see you putting your arms up, and I come running. Now I don't run real fast, but as soon as I jump, you just sidestep like a matador, and I just flop. Okay. All right. Talk to you guys later. Bye bye.
Gleeman